How could Franz Schubert, the composer of the classic Ave Maria, who wasn't a virtuoso musician and who never even owned a piano, be regarded as the greatest composer of classical song? Before Rodgers and Hammerstein and before Lennon and McCartney, there was Franz Schubert.
I'll bet you if you lived in our days, you would sell more records than, or CDs than Paul McCartney or the Beatles.
Genius is one of those things that seems to be visited on people, the way the good fairy comes and taps somebody on the head and says, that's talent, and you got it. It happened with Mozart, it happened with Mendelssohn, it happened with Schubert. These are people who, at a very young age, just seemed to be able to produce music.
You know, you look at the page and you see these notes, and you don't really have any sense of how beautiful they're going to be. He is really one of the great melodists of all time, which makes him, of course, an ideal songwriter. But there are very few pieces by Schubert that don't have some kind of killer melody.
His music is basically underlined with sadness. Even if he writes happy songs or symphonies or piano pieces, there's always an underlying sadness to the piece.
He just had that way of tapping into human emotion. I think it's something purely spontaneous, magical, and unexplainable.
Yeah.
The German Lied, which combines poetry with music, had been around before Schubert burst onto the scene. Mozart and Beethoven were certainly no slouches at it. But it was Schubert, with his wonderful sense of melody and intuitive grasp of poetic text, who made the Romantic Lied a complete and perfect art form.
I would say that probably the best way to think of a lied or an art song is to imagine that the voice and the piano are equal partners. And that's often not the case in a pop tune or a Cole Porter tune or a George Gershwin tune, where the piano is often there basically to back the voice. The piano is an equal partner in the lied, and in fact a lot of the atmosphere of the song and the sense of the text and the subtext of the text is in the piano part.
When you play a Schubert accompaniment, it's not a small task. It's a major task. Those two, singer and pianist, are working together very closely. And for much of the music in his period, particularly the song literature, accompaniments tended to be formula written, pa, pa kind, very simple figures, Alberti basses, things like that. People were not worried so much about what was going on the keyboard. He was, and an enormous amount of sophistication went into his keyboard writing for his songs.
The voice of the piano is just as important, if not more important in many ways. Of course, the pianists would say that, if not more important than the voice of the singer. And when combined, the images that are created are fantastic. So you can't have one without the other, quite frankly. They're equal partners, absolutely.
Schubert's very first masterpiece was Gretchen am Spinnrade, Gretchen at the Spinning Wheel. Based on a Goethe poem from his epic Faust, Schubert masterfully transforms the piano into a spinning wheel, changing its pitch and speed to accompany a young girl's erratic romantic thoughts.
You can hear in the music this incessant quality, and you can hear in the piano part the spinning wheel going and going and going. And that is also the same kind of element of yearning and tension, and you can feel it between the singer and the pianist. It's just pulling you. And the audience is really riveted by this song after years and years and years, and it's just, there's a magical quality about it again.
Schubert was a master at condensing dramatic, poetic text that typically seemed more appropriate to be performed by larger forces, such as an opera with full orchestration. He accomplished this with just two voices, a singer and a piano.
And it's interesting because Schubert didn't always set, fantastic poets. Certainly Goethe was one that he used a lot, but he also used some more obscure poetry and more obscure German poets. But what he does with the words is amazing.
He was himself, I think, so in tune with his personal feelings about love, about sadness, about death, about all these things, about terrible and beautiful things in life. He was so in tune with that, so young. And also he knew how to see that in poetry and how to somehow combine the two together, melt them together like a wonderful silversmith or a goldsmith. He just knew how to make this wonderful recipe, just putting these elements together into one homogeneous whole.
Franz Schubert was born in 1797 and was a true son of Vienna. In fact, he never lived anywhere else. Tragically, he died much too early at the age of 31 of typhoid fever. But within his short lifespan, he achieved so much. He studied at the Imperial Court Choir School, where he was noticed by the school's director, Antonio Salieri, who declared the young Schubert a genius and took him under his wing. When his voice broke around the age of 16, Schubert became a teacher at his father's school, a job he detested. It was during this period that Schubert stumbled upon a ballad, The Earl King, written by his favorite German poet Goethe. It's a chilling tale about a father cradling his sick child in his arms, attempting to outride death on horseback.
The child hears this voice of the Earl King, this evil specter, calling him, seducing him to come with him. And the interesting thing about it is the singer has to portray the song, the narration of the song, but he also has to portray the Earl King's voice and the child's voice. So you have to be able to sing the text in a way that you personify the characters in the drama.
Meine Mutter hat was Gülden gewandt. Mein Vater, gut hörst du nicht, was der Höhlenkönig mir leise verspricht. Sei ruhig, bleib ruhig, mein Kind, in deren Blättern säuselt der Wind. Willst feine Knabe Knabe, du mit mir gehen, meine Töchter sollen dich warten schön, meine Töchter führen den nächtlichen Rhein und wiegen und tanzen und singen dich ein, sie wiegen und tanzen und singen dich ein. Mein Vater, und siehst du nicht dort, Königstüchter am Tisch der Nord. Mein Sohn, ich sehe es genau, es scheinen die alten Weiden so grau. Ich liebe dich, mir kreit deine schöne Gestalt, und bist du nicht willig, so brauch ich Gewalt. Mein Vater, jetzt fasst mich an. Der König hat mir ein Leid getan. Dem Vater grauset, reitet geschwind, hält in Armen das herzende Kind. Reicht den Horn mit mir und Not. In seinen Armen das Kind war tot.
These were both happy and bitter days for Schubert, as he was practically unknown to the public as a composer. He relied on the kindness of others to survive.
He kind of, in a way, he lived in the shadow of Beethoven, who he admired very, very greatly. And he also burned so quickly, he burned his light so quickly, that it was almost like his fame didn't have a chance to catch up with him. But probably the single most important difference between Schubert and, for example, Beethoven and Mozart is that Beethoven and Mozart really achieved fame as performers. Schubert was not a performer. And as a result, he wasn't out on the concert stage every night building a career and a reputation. He was writing music which other people were performing. Had he been a performer, I think he probably would have achieved more fame.
Beethoven, being the center of the musical universe at the time, overshadowed not only Schubert, but all other composers. But as history would show, Schubert had no reason to be envious of Beethoven, as he ultimately achieved the fame he so desired. And although his other compositions aren't quite as famous as his songs, his symphonies, operas, and chamber music all feature his indelible trademark, magical, effortless melodies.
You might say we owe the Trout Quintet to a trip in the country. He was on a walking trip in the countryside, and his host, who knew very much that he wrote things, liked his song called The Trout, Die Forelle. And he suggested, why don't you make a bigger piece out of it? And so he sat down and wrote a very unusual quintet.
It's the part of a lifetime for a bass player. I mean, it's the chamber music part of a lifetime. There's not a lot of string chamber music that includes double bass. And double bass players are absolutely thrilled to have that part. The instrument is used extremely well in that quintet, and most bass players I know would die to play the piece.
Whether he was composing a symphony, sonata, string quartet, or a song, he filled its pages with spontaneous perfection. There seemed to be no limit to his melodic output. In 1815 alone, at the age of 18, he composed 2 symphonies, 4 sonatas, 5 operas, 2 masses, several other choral works, and 146 songs. This is even more remarkable when you consider he never owned a piano and was composing most of these works in his head, often jotting down melodies on the back of menus and any other scrap of paper he could find. It was rumored that he even slept with his glasses on, just in case inspiration struck him in the middle of the night. Schubert once said, "I have come into the world for no purpose but to compose." Schubert created beauty as freely as others breathe and left us an unforgettable legacy of songs like no other songwriter before or after him.
There are certain composers that come in and out of favor, but there are the great composers that always remain, and Schubert is certainly one of them.